Welcome to Muddy River News this week. I'm Bob Gough. My guest is Erica Mitchell with the Hannibal Board of Public Works. Welcome.
Well, hello again. Nice
to
see you.
We talked to you last fall, and
Yes.
You said maybe you might have to buckle up for some rate increases, and appears to be the case, right?
Yes, unfortunately. Absolutely.
Why is that?
Well, we had quite a major winter storm that plummeted a big chunk of the United States, Winter Storm Fern. Luckily here, directly in the tri-state region, we didn't have any effects from that, but we did on the energy market, unfortunately.
Sure.
And so we spent at the HBPW $1.7 million extra just in the month of January, technically for a week of power, because of the energy, the impact of that storm on the energy market. So unfortunately, we had to come to our board of directors on February 17th and suggest and recommend, I should say, a 7% electric rate increase just to make up for the cost of purchase power just for that week in January due to that storm.
So I guess also not only just the grid in itself that affects that, but are you also going to be affected anyway because of oil prices or anything?
Right now, we're not seeing any kind of direct impact from that. You don't want to, you never say never,
Sure.
but right now, we're not necessarily seeing that. We have a lot of other factors that affects the price of electricity, in particular, just talking about electric, weather conditions, congestion on the grid, and it's just all kinds of different things bundled up in there affect the cost of electricity. And so, but that's exactly what we've been seeing. It's just a reoccurring thing over the last 4 years. It's just the same story, different year, unfortunately. So we have increasing demand, and then supply continues to shrink due to a lot of different factors.
Mayor McCoy's also been talking a little bit about the makeup of the board and things like that, and also the possibility of the city having more oversight. But none of those, and while all those things are very interesting to talk about, they really don't affect the bottom line. And the real issue is we've still got to pay to get power. Correct?
Yes, absolutely. And so just to put some numbers and add some color to the situation, over the last 4 years, we've spent an additional $18.5 million just for purchase power. So the electric rate increases, so we've done 4 now over the last 4 years, have only recovered $5 million of that $18.5 million. So we do expect to make a little bit of headway in terms of what kind of revenue we're going to pull in to build back up the electric fund, because right now the electric fund's only sitting at $5 million, and it should be at a minimum of $13 million, and we're talking about the reserve fund.
Right.
And that's important for a plethora of different reasons. You need to have a reserve fund for the event of catastrophic situations. Could be a tornado, or some kind of a major ice storm, or just equipment failure and things like that that has a very high overhead cost. And the electricity industry in general has a very high overhead cost. So we're talking about a $13 million loss in the electric fund just because that's what it has cost us. We've taken hits for that, for paying for electricity. That electric reserve fund needs to have a minimum of at least $13 million. Ideally, we like to be at about 15 or 16. Right now, we're only at 5. So we're talking about kind of a very uncomfortable situation when it comes to the unknowns in the future.
Well, and I mean, what other options do you have besides raising rates?
Exactly. Yeah, and we have to monitor revenues, expenses, debt covenant requirements, capacity costs, projects, and all those things have to marry up and be in harmony to keep things on track and in good standing. So.
And it's not only paying for power, you're also having to pay for the infrastructure that you have in order to provide power, to provide water, sewer, all that. Those are all the things that you've got capital expenses on top of that, and those don't get smaller every year.
Right, and each fund, I think it can be confusing for people who don't live in the industry like we do, but each fund is separate. They're kind of their own silos. And so, the electric fund has definitely been under a lot of stress over the last 4 years due to just that extreme volatility in the market, whereas, water and sewer are a little bit more stable, right? And so one fund can't help out the other funds. So the other funds might be stable, but the electric fund, and that's why we've been in a position to have to raise rates.
And I assume that's a statutory regulatory reason?
Yes, yes. So they
Because
have to be made separate.
Lots of governmental entities say this. We had the same conversation at a Quincy meeting about the public schools this week, in which their director of finance basically said, we've got these buckets, and you can't pour from one bucket to another bucket.
I actually liked that. I looked at that, and I liked that
watched that on Muddy River News,
yes,
right?
I did.
Okay,
absolutely. That's the #1 news source, right? But I did. I watched that, and I thought that is a great way to categorize that. I might have to.
Covering governmental bodies for as long as I have, you see this sort of thing, and especially when it comes to capital expenses as opposed to just personnel expenses and things like that. And of course, in a lot of entities, government and pseudo-governmental, quasi-governmental entities, people are generally of the biggest resource. But in your case, it's the actual power. That is what your biggest expense is to make sure the lights are on in Hannibal.
Yeah, and unfortunately we don't have control over the price of electricity.
No.
So we have a certain amount of our load that we have to rely on the market to have so that we can keep Hannibal running. And so that comes at a cost, and you're vulnerable to what they say the price is.
Yeah.
And you can't control the weather, you can't control the grid congestion. You've got all kinds of things that are beginning to eat up that capacity, the AI data centers, electric vehicles, just a general electrification that we're seeing nationwide is definitely using up a lot of electricity.
Yeah, the data centers has been a big talking point in terms of that. And I know when I worked for the state of Illinois for the Commerce Commission for a time, and we always had to deal with the grid and PJM and what's the other one? FICO, something like that. Anyway, I can't remember. But we dealt with these grids, and then we were always trying to. We had to regulate the rate hikes that Ameren or Nicor or People's Gas or ComEd wanted to put forth through the taxpayers, and that was on the kind of statewide level where they regulated these private companies. In your case, you are not a private company, but you're a governmental body, quasi-governmental. So you've got to make sure you are accountable to your board, and they still have to they can raise the rates, but they don't have to ask. Do they have to go somewhere else for permission, or is your board autonomous enough to just say we can raise the rates?
Yes, so kind of how the structure works at the Board of Public Works is we're a chartered organization. That's what we're governed by. We're an independent, we're our own separate entity under kind of the general umbrella of the City of Hannibal. So it used to be the city manager, but now it's the mayor appoints the board members that sit on the Board of Public Works, and then that's subject to City Council approval. So that's current oversight that they have over the Board of Public Works. But because we are our own independent body, our HBPW Board of Directors does have the ultimate authority to set rates for each utility. And the purpose of that, just a little history here, of why that happened many years ago, why they were separated, is because overseeing the operation of those utility services, they wanted to allow that separation between a tax-funded entity and a rate-funded entity, and not mix the two. So I think sometimes people can be confused and think, we aren't a tax entity, we're a rate-funded entity. And so as the HPBW is a part of the city as a whole, but we are just a little bit different. We're not a department, we're our own separate, independent body. But having that separation and having the board of directors empowered by the city allows for those board members to focus on more of the internal operations of the HBPW and then rely on internal management for the day-to-day functions. So that separation is what kind of helped with that, and the charter is what ultimately helped exist to properly govern that separation.
Yeah, and again, it's the board's decision on what the rate hikes are. Again, the city council or the mayor with the city council's blessing puts those board members in place.
Correct.
But those board members, they don't have to refer it back to the city council. They don't have to refer it back to the state.
Yeah.
They have the authority and the
ultimate
autonomy
decision.
to say our rates are going to go up X or down.
Correct.
But they never go down, do they?
Actually, I think it's great you brought that up, because it was a little while ago, but actually 9 years ago in July 1st of 2017, we did do an electric rate decrease, and it was 2%.
Oh, wow.
Because with that electric reserve fund, it can't get too high, but we don't want it to get too low.
Okay.
So if it gets too high, then you have to reduce rates, because we are a non-for-profit public entity.
Yeah.
And so if they if they get to, the reserve fund gets too high, then you have to do decrease. So we were in a position to do that then. But of course, what people are remembering is what's happened recently, and they're remembering the fact that it's the fourth, rate increase in the last 3 years, and it's something that hasn't happened. They're not used to that.
Blame the weather. Hope for mild winters, mild summers, average temperatures about 70 year round, and then there won't be any issues and your rates will stay the same, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, we wish that it was just weather, but there's so many other components to that, unfortunately.
No,
but I know what you mean. It's definitely been a very volatile market that unfortunately we've been in a position we've been forced to have to respond to. Unfortunately, that means an unpopular decision has to be made, and that's a rate increase. We don't like obviously doing that, but our board, as well as just the HBPW staff in general, we have a fiduciary responsibility to the utility to keep the fund on track and in good standing. And so what that requires sometimes is an uncomfortable rate increase so that we can keep the services existing for the community.
Well, also, I would assume the board members are ones who actually have to live in there? Do they have to be members? And that's so they're the ones, they're accountable, so they're raising their own rates too.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, so when they're doing that, they understand that, and some of them have businesses too, so they have a double whammy there. So I like to think that when we have a board member come on, we try to do a good job of really educating them and on understanding the ins and outs, and this is really what goes on. That is, it can be complicated to understand, but we really try to water that down, especially with what I do for the board and that public education and information. But they come to understand how it works, and it is operated like a business. It is a business, but we are a nonprofit organization. But we do have to run that way because it's an expensive industry to maintain.
Well, thank you for your time again, as always. And if we do this again in the fall, maybe you'll have better news for us.
I know. I hope so. Yeah, absolutely.
Erica Mitchell, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for now. I'm Bob Gough. We'll see you next week.